Good morning to everybody who is west of the Mississippi. Good afternoon to everybody else. Perhaps if you are in another place in the world, good evening. I'm Brian Washburn, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Endurance Learning. Today, we're going to be talking about the fix for lecture-heavy training. You can see my information right there on the screen in front of you. And also, if you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd love to be connected. And one of the things about LinkedIn is that a lot of times people use that just as kind of almost like an exchange of business cards. But I've found that I am being more present on LinkedIn. I'm posting more things. And so if you wanted to connect with me there, that is the perfect place in order to interact and maybe even see some of the stuff that I'm posting, that we're posting. Things like, you can even find out based on your personality, what color Mr. Sketch marker are you, or what scent are you? The one thing that I do ask, if you are going to take that quiz, and I'm actually going to give you a link to that quiz in the chat here, then please don't send me nasty notes if you don't get the color that you like. You can always retake that quiz. But also, one of the things that I find most valuable about the LinkedIn presence is the interactions that take place. So you can see here earlier this week, I posted about Dot Day and celebrating Dot Day, and I thought it was all about voting dots, but apparently it's not. So it's about a Peter Reynolds book called The Dot. And that is, when we get into the conversations, so LinkedIn is much more than just kind of collecting contact information. It's where I'm able to share some information and where we're able to actually get some conversation going. And oftentimes I'll learn as much through the comments as through posts that people are putting up on LinkedIn. So I'd love for you to join me on LinkedIn. Another thing before we get started here is next month we have our webinar, Managers Matter, Driving Better Training Outcomes. So we'll be talking a little bit about the role that managers take and the role that managers play when it comes to making sure that our learning efforts are effective. So I hope you'll join us next month. The QR code is right there. And I see that my colleague Rachel has put it into the chat as well if you'd like to sign up for that. That will be Thursday, October 16th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. A few other announcements before we get started. Stick around. Today we are going to be giving away two different things. One will be one of the books that I've written. So whether it's Instructional Design on a Shoestring or What's Your Formula, if your name gets pulled, you get to choose which book. And then somebody else is going to have an opportunity to win a free seat in one of our e-learning classes. So we have one class that is about the foundations of L&D, and that is kind of a general landscape type of course. Learn a little bit more especially if you're trying to get your foot in the door of L&D. And then we have another e-learning course called Training Delivery Basics, and that is focused on how do we best deliver training, especially if we're delivering or being asked to deliver something that we ourselves didn't create. And so let me put a link to that actually in the chat if you would like to find more information. Oh, Rachel beat me to it. If you'd like to find more information about that. So as we get started here, it looks like we have a pretty good group to get started here. And I would love for folks, if you are just able to in the chat, go ahead and share your name and where you're joining us from. Today, I'm joining from my home office in Seattle, but it is a Blue Thursday. Even though I'm in Seattle, you can't take the Buffalo Bills out of me. We play out the Miami Dolphins tonight, so it is time to squish the fish. But before I have a chance to sit down and watch the Bills beat the Miami Dolphins, I am very excited wow, there's a lot of people, and those names and locations are flying fast and furious into the chat. I love that people are being able to get warmed up in the chat. I will have several different question prompts throughout the course of today. Would love to get some more comments and chat going on here. Also, if I happen to say something throughout the course of today that you want to start to engage in conversation about, please feel free to jump into the chat and start those conversations as well. We'll be watching those as we go. In terms of what we're about to focus on today, hopefully, as you signed up for this, and you know that this is kind of the fix for lecture heavy training, that can mean a lot of different things. I got into a lot of notes saying, I'm really looking forward to today's session. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about, first of all, um, why do we lecture? And so we'll just kind of take a quick look at that. Honestly, lecture in and of itself is not bad. It's when we only lecture that we can start to run into some problems, especially with learner engagement and learner retention and their ability or their motivation to do something outside of the training room. So we'll talk a little bit about why we lecture. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a formula that if you follow this formula every single time that you put together a training session, it will eradicate lecture heavy training. That is my promise to you. You can Google creative alternatives to lecture. You can put a prompt into ChatGPT about asking to help make your training more engaging. But what you're going to find in today's webinar is really about a formula that if you follow it, it's going to eradicate that lecture heavy training. It's really not necessarily about the activities. It's about understanding how people learn and then designing a complete learning experience that will kind of embrace how people learn. One last thing I do want to mention before we go too far today is that we do have a participant advisory. There will be breakout discussions inside. Please don't let that scare you away. A couple things about this. One is this is one of those things that we've started to do in our webinars, and a number of people have sent me comments saying, the first time that you put people in breakout rooms, I was out of there. I logged off and I was out. The next time I joined in the breakout room, and it was actually A, less scary and less painful than I thought it would be, and B, that's really where the learning kind of hit home for me. And so I will ask you if you have the time, please stick around for those breakout discussions. Even when I've done some of these similar topics, when I've done a train the trainer session in person, a lot of times what people will say was, when you were giving us the information, I got it, right? At an intellectual level. But it wasn't until I actually had a chance to practice it did I have my real aha moment. And that's what we're going to give you an opportunity to do towards the end of today's webinar is to practice a little bit of this formula that I'm going to be giving you. But before we get into any of that, we're going to put up a poll question because sometimes there's different reasons that we train. And so my question here when it comes to why do we train, and we'll give you two choices here. Is it to when you're doing a training session, is it because you want to help people increase their knowledge, or is it to boost their performance? So go ahead and give us your thoughts here. We have about 60 people who have responded, so we'll wait for another moment or two as those responses roll in. All right, why don't we go ahead and close this out? And we're seeing so I really appreciate these results, right? So what we're seeing is that there's kind of both, right? There's no both choice here. So really, I was asking him to choose one or the other. Are we training to boost performance? Are we training to increase knowledge? And I wanted to just to kind of get a feel for where a lot of the participants were coming from today, because as we think of training there's a number of different considerations that we need to take into account as we're putting together a training session. And one way that I've been able to start to organize my thoughts around this is really to take a look at two specific aspects of training. So one of those aspects is it's about the amount of information that we want to present, right? So, and if you take a look at this matrix that's on there, I call this the training intention matrix. It goes from left to right. So we can have a range of information from loads of content on one side to content that's highly prioritized on the other. And sometimes it's kind of a mix. So you have that continuum. And then from bottom to top of this matrix, what we have is our intent. So, do we just want to make people aware of certain things? And so, this is kind of that information sharing type of thing. Or do we want people to be able to do things differently or better? This is kind of the performance type of thing. And so, what I'd love for you to do is to kind of digest this for a moment. And then I'm going to put another question up on the screen. And that question is going to be, in what quadrant do you feel a lot of your organization's training falls? So, do you feel like your organization is putting lots of content? And when we take a look at this, you take a look at the top of the screen too, right? The title of this is for a 1 to 2 hour session, which is the typical length of time that a lot of like training sessions run. So some training sessions run 5 days and you can put lots of content in there. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is a typical session. It could be a lunch and learn. It could be just kind of a session, an orientation session, an onboarding session, a session that you would do that takes about 1 to 2 hours. And if you think about that kind of session, and if you think about the kind of training that your organization offers, my question to you is, where do you think you fall? Is it our organization likes to put loads of content and expects people to do things new or differently or better? That's quadrant one. Is it we do loads of content, we just need people to be aware of things? That's quadrant two. Quadrant three is we prioritize things really, but we still just want people to be aware. And then quadrant four is we prioritize things and we want people to do things new or differently or better. So go ahead and try to give me an idea of where your organization falls when it comes um, to what kind of trainings you're doing. And I'm just seeing some comments here in the chat as people are filling out this, or people are responding to this poll. 1 to 2 hours of training would lend to quadrants two and three for their organization, 2 to 3. So I see some people saying, if this is a continuum, I might be kind of 2 to 3. Let's go ahead and end this poll. And what we're seeing is just kind of a bunch of different responses. And so I think this is really interesting in terms of the distribution of where we find ourselves when it comes to where the kind of organization where we find ourselves with this. And so when we think of this, whether it's quadrant one or two or three or four, um, I want to also kind of keep in mind not just where our organizations fall in this, but also what our learners' expectation is for training. And when I do a train the trainer session, one of the things that I'll always I'll start off a train the trainer session by asking this question: what's the best professional development experience you've ever had? And people will talk a little bit, and then I'll bring them back together as a large group, and then I'll ask, what made it so good? And this is the typical list that I get. So when it comes to participants say, when it comes to their best professional development experiences, they say it's hands-on. They say it's interactive. They learn from others. They have an opportunity to share. They're allowed to make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes in the training room. There's accountability. Sometimes they even say, props are used and then it's relevant or people are able to put it to use right away. These are not my words. These are words from participants from actual flip charts that I've written during train the trainer sessions in terms of their best professional development experiences. So when the thing here is that we kind of in our gut know what good training feels like. And then when it comes to designing training, we have all these competing priorities. But the thing that I've never ever heard anybody else mention in terms of their best professional development experience is I had a chance just to listen for an hour straight, or they lectured at me for the entire time, or we got so much content which made it such a great professional development experience, right? Nobody's ever said that. And yet when we are putting together training, a lot of times that's what it ends up being. And so that's what we're trying to address here. And so when we think of these quadrants again, up in this upper right hand corner, that quadrant one, where and this is a lot of times when I'm doing a train the trainer session and we'll do adult learning theory and people are like, oh, okay, I want this to be interactive, I want it to be engaging, I want people to say this is their best learning experience. And then they'll tell me, but if I only have an hour, I have all this content I need to cover. And the problem with quadrant one is that it really is not realistic. To have loads of content and to expect people to do things newer, differently, or better in 1 or 2 hours, it's just not realistic. And so something's got to give. And sometimes that thing that has to give is okay, maybe we have all this content, but maybe we don't need people to do things newer, differently, or better. We'll take the activities out. We just want them to be aware of some of this information. And that gets us to quadrant two, which is we're basically just checking the box. And so and you've probably experienced this kind of training. Perhaps you're even asked to put this training together. I was doing a train the trainer session in Des Moines earlier this year, and the sponsor of the program at one point asked, well, "But we have a legal department that says we need to cover all this stuff. They don't care about the activities. We just have to cover all this stuff." And that's awareness training, right? It's almost like I don't even know if training is the right word. It's almost like fine print, right? It's checking the box. If we want people to actually start to really digest some of this information, we need to move over to the right side of this matrix. And in box number three, that's where when we can start to prioritize critical content and we want people to be aware of things. We don't necessarily have the expectation they're going to do something new or differently or better. That's where we start to get some training that's a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fun. This is when we can start to bring in activities like Jeopardy or Kahoot. We can have case study discussions. We can have discussions that are at conceptual level. People may leave quadrant three kind of trainings and say, that was the best training I've ever had. Now, which is great. That's a data point. It's not the only data point that's important, but it's a data point, and it's certainly better than I was so bored, right? But then we kind of take a look at quadrant four, and that's where we start to get effective because we expect people to do something new or differently or better. We have the right amount of information. We make sure that we're not flooding people with a bunch of information they don't need, and that's where we get to effective. And so, in order to get around this matrix here and get us into quadrant four, I'm going to give you a formula here. And the formula, it's especially if you've been in the world of training and development, if you've been exposed to these concepts, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, but it's also it requires a lot of work. It also requires time to be able to do this stuff. And so let's talk about this real quick, and then I'll kind of give you an example of what this looks like. So the formula goes, the first thing you need are well-crafted learning objectives. I'll talk about those in just a second. And you need to add those to instructionally sound training design. Okay, this is super generic. This formula is super generic. So I'm not necessarily perhaps telling you something that you didn't know already, but let's dive into what these things actually mean. Because the fact is, if you do follow this formula, and there are some underlying layers to this formula, but if you follow this formula, every single time you will not have a lecture heavy training. So let's talk about learning objectives first. And learning objectives, there are three things that a well-crafted learning objective needs. The first thing is it needs to be participant centered. When we and the language we use when we think of our learning objectives is very important, because if we start out by saying my learning objective is that I want to tell this group this, it's very different from by the end of this session my learners will be able to do this, right? And we'll compare that in just a second. There's two other things that we need here for learning objectives. One is that they need to be action oriented. So we need some sort of verb in our learning objective statement, and then also they need to be observable. And so let me give you an example of what this looks like. So a sample learning objective could be this, right? This is very simple. Let's imagine we're doing some sort of sales training. So by the end of this lesson, participants will be able to list the 5 steps in our sales process, right? So this is a learning objective that is well written, well constructed for 2 reasons. Well, it has all 3 things in it. One is it's participant centered, right? So our participants will be able to do something. It's not, I'm going to tell them something or I'm going to show them something or whatever it might be. So, first of all, we're thinking about our participants. The second thing is that we actually want to be able to have them do something and we need to be able to observe it. And that's this part. List the 5 steps in our sales process, right? So, this is our learning objective, which is very different from I'm going to tell them about the 5 steps in our sales process. That looks very different, and that gives us very different marching orders when it comes to putting this together. So let's take a look. Let's dissect this. I'm going to ask you here in the chat to give me some thoughts, and this is my question to you. If this is our learning objective, what has to happen at some point during the training if we want our participants to be able to list the 5 steps in our sales process? Go ahead and give me your thoughts in the chat here. I'm seeing all sorts of thoughts here that say they gotta, where is it? Where'd that go? There's too many answers here in the chat. They gotta list them, right? At some point, the learners have to, why? Because this is what we said, right? Our learners are going to list these 5 steps. They practice activity. They give them, somebody else said we need to give them the 5 steps. So yes, there are 2 things that absolutely need to happen. And so when we think of this, the first thing that has to happen before people can list those, right? So we need to give them some information. We need to teach those 5 steps. If that is our learning objective and we expect them to be successful, we can't just kind of say, all right, our sales process is 5 steps, list them, right? We need to give people those 5 steps. And something else that people are talking about, if they have to list them, they need a practice activity, they need some kind of ooh, I'm going to get to that one in just a second. They have to explain it in their own words, whatever it might be. They have to list those 5 steps, right? So these are 2 things that have to absolutely happen if this is our learning objective. Now, somebody in here said some kind of connection has to be made. David Spector, wherever you are, thank you so much because that is something else that has to happen and it's not in one of these 2 steps. And this next thing I'm going to talk to you about is that this dates back to research that's almost 100 years old. This is schema theory. There is a cognitive psychologist named Frederick Bartlett who talked about this idea that our brains need to make sense and organize things according to what is familiar to us. And so this thing where David Spector is saying we need to have some sort of connection to this. What's in it for me? So before we teach those 5 steps, before we have people list things, there's a first step. And when I review people's lesson plans, when people come to me and say, "Can you help me make this more engaging?" The step I'm about to talk about is the step that I have found is most missing anytime we do this. And that's the first step. It's something that I call the anchor step. And so what I might do if I was teaching the sales process is I might try to connect this to something that might be more familiar, pretty maybe universally familiar to people. Thinking of, what else has steps in a process? Maybe cooking, right? Maybe following a recipe. And I might ask that question, what happens if we're making dinner and we decide to skip a step in the recipe? Now, maybe that dinner will turn out better because we're experimenting. Maybe it'll be worse because the bread didn't rise or whatever it was because we used the wrong ingredient or we skipped a step or we added the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? So more often than not, it's not good. So following a process is really important. So let me talk about our sales process, right? So now we've anchored people in to the concept. They're able to make a connection in terms of why it's important, the what's in it for me. Now we can teach them those steps. And then we can have them, like you all mentioned, if we say that our objective is to have people list these steps, now we can have them list those steps or some sort of activity where they have to do something with these steps, right? But we're not done yet. There is a fourth step in this process. And I like that what Savannah also wrote when it comes to that practice piece, it has to be in a safe way. And so we can talk a lot more about kind of dialogue education and how do we get people to engage in a safe way. I love the chat that's going on right now too, because there's a lot of good things in there, and to recognize that I'm not the only person that has a monopoly on all that is wise and good about this. I really appreciate the activities going on in the chat as well. But there's a fourth step here. So we have an anchor, we have content, we have application. This fourth step is rooted in research that goes back to 1888. In Hermann Ebbinghaus, if you've heard of him, and he came up with this concept called the forgetting curve, because it does not matter how much effort, how much time, how much creativity we put into our training session, no matter how well designed it is, nobody is going to leave our session having memorized every single thing that we've taught them. And so we do need to give our learners a little bit of structure for what happens when they leave the learning environment. And that's a step I call future use. And this could be something, actually, let me ask you this. How would you help people remember this if we've done these first three steps? How would you help people to remember these five steps once they leave the training environment? I'm seeing a lot of comments in here. Job aid. Ooh, yeah, acronyms. Yes, absolutely. Give them something that they can use outside of here. It's easy to remember. It could be an mnemonic device. Acronyms. Uh, let's see. Uh, Job aid, feedback. One thing that and so I'm with the job aid folks. I really appreciate the idea that we can kind of give people something that's physical, tangible, and so this idea is just distribute like a wallet card, or that they can put in their wallet if they need to remember if they're going out on a sales call, or if they do virtual sales, give them a card that they can stick to their monitor, something that they can use in order to be able to remember without having to actually memorize everything they're using. Now, there will be instances in which people need to have information memorized, but oftentimes that's not necessarily the case. So giving people a job aid is a great future use activity. And so when we talk about these four steps and the labels to these four steps, when we talk about good design, right? It is anchor, content, application, and future use. These are the four steps that if we put these and if we incorporate these into every single thing that we do, then we will no longer have lecture heavy training. So we can do lecture, right? Lecture, I'm not saying that we should drop lecture. We can do lecture. And we need to make sure that we build other things around that lecture that make it a really good, holistic learning experience for our learners. Now, I'm going to go back to that formula that I mentioned, learning objectives plus a training design model here. That is what's going to eliminate lecture heavy learning. Now, let me ask you, and this is going to be a rhetorical question. I'm not, if you want to put it in the chat, you can, but how is this different from a learning objective that says, my objective for this training is to instruct learners about the five-step sales process? Remember before it was participant centered, so we need to have them do something. Here, if it is instructor centered, then it is just, I guess success is defined by have I instructed them on the five-step sales process, right? So when we talk about the idea of learning objectives being participant centered, it's not just rhetoric. This is something that we need to make sure that we shift our mindset if this is the kind of objectives that we're coming up with in order to make sure that the design of the session kind of follows what it is that we set out, what it is that we said we're going to do when we set out. It's also, or how would it be different if we just said this, right? If we want to make it learner centered, learners will know each step of the five-step sales process. So this is another one of those things where, okay, well, it's learner centered, it's action oriented, right? They'll know. But what are we doing? Before, when we had that objective that said they're going to list the five steps, we had them doing something. Here, if they're going to know that, this is oftentimes another kind of reason why we have a lot of lecture heavy training because we use is the action verb that we're using doesn't lend itself easily to translation of being able to see something happen in the classroom. So, just to remind you, we have this formula, right? So, well-crafted learning objectives, they need to be learner-centered, action-oriented, observable, and instructionally sound training design, and that's the anchor content application future use. One of the things, a few months ago, we did a training called Boring Training Not on My Watch. We did a webinar called Boring Training Not on My Watch. And one of the resources that we gave during that, and I know a number of people that have signed up for this webinar have downloaded this. But if you would like, and my colleague Rachel will go ahead and put the link to this resource there. And the reason I'm putting this up here is because sometimes it's really difficult for uh, uh, for people to think of what are some different activities I can use besides lecture. And beyond that, now with these four, Brian's saying we have to have four steps. Well, this cookbook has 86 different activities. 11 of them are icebreakers, but 75 of them are activities that fall into the category of anchor activities, activities, application, or future use. And so this could be a resource that you could download and you can use it in order to figure out, okay, if I need to think of what is going to be an anchor activity, how do I give people the what's in it for me? It has some ideas in there for you. We don't want you just to kind of leave here and think, okay, he said I have to come up with some different activities, but what are they? Some answers in here, and maybe these will inspire some other thoughts. But now, what I'm going to do, and this is the time that I warned you about, because I am going to ask you for a little bit of help. We're going to put you into breakout rooms here, and we're going to ask you to see if you can use this formula that I just shared with you in terms of well-crafted learning objectives and instructionally sound training design in order to come up with something that's going to be engaging and not lecture heavy. So what we have is I'm going to give you a lesson plan and I'm going to give you some content, right? And that lesson plan has an objective, and I will tell you right now, it's not a well-written objective. If you can see it on your screen, my colleague just put the handout that you're going to be asked to use in your small group. If you can see it on your screen, the objective here is in this 60-minute block with new employees, cover our organization's 6 organizational values and explain how it impacts our work. So the first thing I need you to do is to decide, is that a good learning objective? It's not. And then if it's not, it's not. How would you change it, right? And the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is to take a look at what's currently there. And what's currently on this lesson plan is really talking points. How would you actually use this formula, the anchor content application future use formula, in order to redesign what's here, in order to make it a more holistic and effective learning experience? So we're going to go ahead and put you into breakout rooms. And then if for whatever reason you're not able to get into the breakout room, hold on until people have gotten to the breakout rooms, and then I'll actually facilitate here with the group that's left over. We're going to try to figure out how do we actually redesign this. So let's go ahead and put you in breakout rooms. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. And then on the other side of 10 minutes, we'll come back and we'll just hear some thoughts. And so don't panic. 10 minutes is not a ton of time. But we want you to get as far as you can. Just get some ideas and then we'll go from there. All right, Aaron, are most people in their breakout rooms?
It looks like it. We have about 25 people here.
Okay. Well, for the folks that are still with us that weren't able to get into the breakout rooms, let's go ahead and take a look at this. And so this is the handout that was put into the chat, and so let's take a look at the original lesson plan first. And that learning objective, it's not a good learning objective. And so what I would love for you to do is, if you have some thoughts in terms of what it should be, go ahead and drop it into the chat and let's see if we can redo this lesson plan a little bit. So right now it is in the 60-minute block of time with new employees, cover our organization's 6 organizational values and explain how they impact our work. If you have some thoughts, go ahead and drop that into the chat. How would you redo that learning objective?
Write that question into the chat too, just so we have it.
And it looks like several of the folks that are with us here are note takers. So
I just noticed that too.
yeah, it's not going to be giving us answers. And as people are typing, Aaron, did you see were there questions? I wasn't really paying attention to the chat. Were there questions that we'll want to think about when we come back together in a large group?
People were mostly commenting and complimenting what you were sharing. There was several people who were saying, responding to things you were saying, like this isn't measurable. How will we know this is evaluated? And then there was not questions to come back to. No.
Okay. All right, so we have some thoughts here, and for those people who are in transit, totally fine to continue to listen. Definitely, or you can pull over and give us some thoughts, but no, it's totally fine to listen. So here we have several thoughts here. Rewrite to be student focused. Cover is a verb aimed more to the instructor. Absolutely, Catherine, that is a very good observation. Right now, this is currently written in terms of what the instructor should be doing. And that does not lend itself well to figuring out what kind of engagement can we even have here? What outcomes do we want from our learners? Maria said the learners will understand our 6 organizational values and how they impact our work. So that is much more learner centered because it's saying the learners are going to do something. They're going to understand our 6 organizational values and how they impact our work. Now, one of the things that I did not mention when we were in the large group, but there are some certain words that are considered they're action words, right? So they're verbs, and at the same time, they're not as observable as perhaps we would need them to be in order to come up with some good design ideas. So words like know or understand or recognize, those are really difficult for us to be able to take a look at and say, okay, based on what I've written here, I know exactly what activity I want to do, right? So with know or understand or recognize, it's really difficult. It's different than like they'll be able to list, they'll be able to explain, they'll be able to do some other things. Catherine, okay, we have several thoughts here. Learners will state how our organizational values impact their work. That's a great one. At the end of the session, participants will be able to identify our 6 organizational values and describe how these values impact their work. All right, so I am hearing lots of thoughts in terms of let's do something with these so they can actually explain to us how they're going to impact our work. Learners will state our organization's 6 organizational values and their impact. That one we'd be able to actually see it, right? Would they are people able to state these values? Although perhaps identify could be swapped out for describe, and describe could become explain in my earlier response. So this what I'm seeing right now in the chat is people starting to wrestle with themselves, which is exactly the process that Aaron and I take anytime that we're designing something too. And so I'm just gonna just for the sake, there's no there's not necessarily one of these that's any better, but just for the purposes of this conversation, I'm gonna grab one of these and then let's see what we can kind of come up with the in terms of a lesson plan for it. So learners will uh, identify the values, they will state our values, they will let's just do learners will state how our organizational values impact their work. I'm gonna take that one. I'm gonna put it into our new lesson plan here. So learners will state how our organizational values impact their work. So if we think about using this as our objective, anybody have any thoughts on an anchor activity? How would we connect this to something that's more familiar with people? If we want them to really kind of internalize to be able to state our organizational values, is there anything that you can think of that could help our learners connect maybe our organizational values with something that's familiar to them, so we can dip our toes into the waters of this conversation around organizational values without overwhelming them? I'm going to give you some thoughts or some time to think about that uh, when it comes to an anchor activity here. I'm going to jump ahead to the content, and I'm just going to say we will distribute a handout with our organizational values, asking participants to take a few minutes to read the handout, and while reading, think about how each value may impact the way they work at our company. So that's going to be our content activity, but any thoughts in terms of an anchor activity? All right, Catherine says, tell stories or provide examples and ask students how these values are important to them. Savannah says, by the end of today's session, learners will examine our organization's six values and assess how they impact. Ooh, those are good ones. Those would be two different objectives. So they would examine the values, and then learners will also assess how they impact our work on a daily basis. I appreciate that one too. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to create these objectives, and then those objectives kind of give us the direction, the true north, in terms of where we should go with our lesson plan. Jordan says matching activity where the learner matches the organizational values to common workplace situations. I like that. So why don't we start just with uh, offer a list of values and another list of common workplace situations. Have learners work with a partner for 5 minutes to match situations to values.
With that, Brian, we could even have them work individually for a few minutes and collect their thoughts, and then turn to a partner and have that rich discussion with the person next to them.
Even yes, even better, right? So that everybody has to kind of think about something critically on their own first, and then work with a partner. So there's again there's a variety of different ways to do it. This could be a 10-minute activity overall. And then what we might want to do is actually give them a little bit more detailed information about our organizational values. And that's what you see in the handout that's there. Have people read through it and think about, okay, let's think about some ways that I'm going to work here. So we can give them another 10 minutes to do that. Now I'm kind of curious If we say that people should state how our organizational values will impact their work, how are we going to see that they actually are able to do that? Here we are, the application piece. And Aaron, can you give me a time check real quick?
I was just gonna do that about 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. So if we have some sort of application piece, how are we actually going to see that people can state how our organizational values impact their work? Any thoughts in terms of an application activity here? They've had a chance to think through these values, match them to some common workplace situations, think about read some more information about them, and think about how they could impact uh, their work at our company. Now we have to see. Now is where the kind of the rubber meets the road. Are they getting it? Can they state how our organizational values will impact their work?
Rissa has an idea, Brian. We could have them discuss where in your daily work routine might these values show up. And perhaps
Yeah,
I'll even build on that. Maybe it's a reflection first. They think of an example and then they share that with either a small group or with the large group. Great idea, Rissa. And we have one more minute and then we'll come back.
and that could be a 20-minute conversation right there, right? Especially if we do individual, small group, and maybe even large group. And then finally, we have that future use piece, so that people don't forget it. And the future use piece simply could be it could be a call to action. It could be just kind of keep this sheet handy, and return back to it once a week, right? So it could be something like that as well. So there's some different things in here, which is very different than our original lesson plan, which was to have me just talk about these 6 values for 45 minutes, which sounds riveting, but may not be super effective. All right. Why don't
I'm gonna
we?
close these rooms.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for jumping into this conversation. Yeah, at Savannah, absolutely. Run through scenarios where they are asked to demonstrate how these values show up. I love that. All right. It looks like we have everyone back from the breakout rooms. So thank you very much for giving us some time just to be able to connect with the other people who are attending this session as well, and share some ideas. I know that when for the folks that were remaining here in the large group, not everybody could make it into breakout rooms because some people joined through the web browser, or some people are joining via mobile. Some people are in transit to their job or whatever it might be. And so not everybody was able to make it into breakout rooms. And so we had a conversation here, and it was a great conversation. I'd love to hear actually, just in the chat, uh, so when we take a look at this initial learning objective, and Aaron, are you able to see my screen?
We are seeing the handout.
Perfect. All right. So when it comes to this initial learning objective, what did people do to modify it, to make it a little bit more, well, to not a little bit, to make it learner centric and to make it action oriented? If you could kind of put into the chat some of the objectives that you all came up with, I'd love just to kind of see what some of the conversations were in the small groups. Room 10 rules. Love that. All right. So, By the end of the session, new employees will be able to identify our organization's 6 organizational values and explain how they impact their work. That is participant-centered and action-oriented. We broke it into 2 separate objectives. Yeah, even the one that the Bartram just mentioned, that could be 2 separate objectives. I love that. I love the thinking that's going on here, right? So you don't have to just accept what is given to you here as an order taker. You can break this up into 2 different learning objectives, and that can give you a more clearly defined path for what success is going to look like. Well, if we're training for performance, what is that going to look like? Definitely changed verbs to align more appropriately to what learners needed. And so in Aaron, if you're seeing some things that jump out at you, please feel free to jump in. During our conversation in the main room, we started to kind of talk a little bit and debate a little bit about the verbs and some verbs, the point came out, some verbs don't actually, they may be verbs, right? And technically verbs are action oriented, but they don't actually lend themselves well to observation. Things like know, understand, comprehend, recognize. Those words are verbs, but they're very difficult to give us a path to performance. And so we kind of went towards, and I'll kind of share what we came up with within our group, was learners will state how our organizational values impact their work. Now, I wish that we had time to actually hear some of the different examples that you all came up with. In our group, what we came up with was, first of all, offer a list of the values, just generic list of the values, and then another list of common workplace situations and see if people could actually match up these values with, what would be a common situation that this value would actually impact. The next thing so that was our anchor activity. Then after that, what we did was we were going to just distribute the handout that's here, have people take a look at it, read it, and while they're reading it, actually ask them to be thinking about something. So think about how each of these values may impact the way that they work at our company. And then when it comes to the application piece, so we don't have any lecture in here. Initially, this lesson plan was 45 minutes of lecture. This one has no lecture because we're asking people to read something and think about something, and then reflect on their own job description and see how these values could show up in their work this week. And then work with a small group to share how these values will show up. And then we kind of ran out of time before we got into the future use activity. But those are, and I did notice that somebody said referencing Herman Ebbinghaus is like nails on a chalkboard, because his research was flawed when it comes to memory, and which is absolutely true. And at the same time, the concept of the forgetting curve kind of is credited to that time, whether or not that research was right. There's probably better research to cite, and yet the truth remains that people are not going to memorize every single thing that we do during a training session. So that future use piece is very important. We are coming to the end here. What I would love, and I see that, ooh, Stephanie just highlighted the learning objective generator. And so if you are kind of struggling to come up with really good learning objectives, there are some links to learning objective generators that are in the chat, in addition to Bloom's taxonomy and some other things as well. What I would love as we start to wrap up here is I would love to hear from you. What's one thing you're taking away from today's session and realistically think that you could bring into your next training session? So if you could just kind of give me a feel in the chat for what it is that you're taking away and you think that you could realistically bring into your next training session, that would be really helpful. And I know that we're starting to get towards the end. We're not at the end yet. We do have a couple things to give away. So stick around because we're hoping that people are present to win. So I'm just going to give people a few moments to jot down their key takeaway in the chat here. So the formula, anchor, content, application, future use. I like the anchor. Please don't forget about the anchor. As I mentioned, when I do review lesson plans, that's typically the biggest mistake I'll see is that people just start with the content. They get into the conversation. They're like, we don't have a ton of time. We only have 30 minutes. We only have an hour. but setting the stage, giving the what's in it for me, connecting the information, just and it can be something as simple as tell me about a time when. So if we're doing something on customer service, tell me about your best customer service experience. Doesn't have to take a long time, but it just helps to focus learners on the what's in it for them. All right, please keep those comments coming. I'm going to go through a few final things here. One is if this time flew for me, I don't know if it flew by for you, but if this was not enough time to spend with your number one Bills fan and instructional design geek Brian Washburn, please do let's connect, right? So the QR code that you see on your screen right now is going to connect to my calendar. I would love to have virtual coffee at some point with as many people who are in the field of learning development as possible. And so please feel free to grab a time on my calendar and let's have a conversation. Let's nerd out a little bit over training and development. Something else that we just want to make sure that you are aware of is if you struggle with the amount of time that you have in putting together training programs, we have a tool called Soapbox where you put in some basic information about your training session and it will generate a sequence and flow of activities, including content using AI in order to generate a lesson plan for you. So there's a QR code for you to try that out. If you'd like to learn more about that, let's talk about that as well. All right, Aaron, let's give some stuff away. So here we have, there's this first drawing is going to be for your choice of what's your formula or instructional design on a shoestring. So if you could find somebody at random who has been a great participant today, we'd love to hear that name and send them a book. And so if you do hear your name called, we'll need to get a little bit of information from you, but we know where to find you because we have your email address. So we'll reach out to you and ask you for your mailing information.
Okay, first random name. Da-da-da. Sheila Semper. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Sheila Semper.
All right, Sheila, congratulations. We have a winner for our September giveaway. So Sheila will be reaching out to you to get your information so that we can send that along to you. The next thing we're going to give away, I also noticed that somebody is saying, let's go Buffalo. So Aaron, as we choose the next person, don't let that influence you in terms of the random selection. But I do appreciate a little shout out for the Bills. The next thing we're going to give out here is your choice of a seat in one of our asynchronous courses, whether that is Foundations of L&D. So this one is really geared more towards people who are looking to break into the field of learning development, learn a little bit more about the landscape, and learn a little bit more about some of the different tools and strategies in order to be successful in this field. So that's the Foundations of L&D. And then we have another asynchronous course where it's focused on training delivery basics. And this will walk you through how to actually put together your thoughts and deliver training that's going to be more effective. This one actually ends with an opportunity for me to review a short video of you delivering training as well. So go ahead, Aaron. What do we got?
The winner of this is Robin Ertz.
Robin Ertz,
Congratulations.
congratulations. Yes. And one last thing, just to remind folks that again, next month we do have another webinar where we'll be focused on managers and the role managers play in making sure that learning is applied into the workspace after people have completed a learning event. If you would like to connect with me and you did not sign up for virtual coffee, you have my information right here. So please feel free to email me, or you can go ahead and shoot me a note on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect there. And that is about it. That's all we have for you today. And until next time, we wish everybody a happy training.